Hello, welcome to a new Flutter video. This is going to be a video about animations, simple animations. In this case, we'll be going through fades and slides transitions. Fade because it's the simplest one, which just requires you to pass it an animation controller, and slide requires a little bit more interaction by using a twin, in this case with an offset. And on further videos we'll look into a few more interesting tweens and transitions that we can use to provide some simple animations. So let's get to it. We have here a simple app. This app has nothing else than just a button to go into a second view. We've got a little kitty here, we've got a title, and we've got a bottom detail area here. So what we're going to do is animate this title and animate this bottom here. I want this title to fade and slide in from the left outside of the viewing area into our viewing area, and the bottom bar to do the same, but instead of coming from the side, it's going to come from the bottom into its final position here. So let's get into it. Now, I have the code here slightly separated. So we've got a home page here, we've got our second page. In our second page, then we have two stateless widgets, which is a text and image that we have here on the emulator, and then we have our bottom that we have down here just with the text with a little shadow just to look cute. So let's start with that. We could use an animation controller inside each of these widgets, changing them to stateful widgets, but we actually don't need to do that. Since we want these animations to run at the same time, we're actually just going to create an animation controller on the first parent page, parent class in this case, parent widget, uh, and control everything from there. Now, to use an animation controller, we need to have obviously a stateful widget, but also we need to have a ticker provider. Ticker provider is what allows us to sync the frames per second going through the Flutter application with the animations we want to do, and so that in each frame the animation changes, so we actually see the animation going through. So in this case, because we're only going to use one animation controller, we're going to use a single ticker provider to save memory and processing power. We don't need more than one. If we did, we just use a normal ticker provider state mixin, but this is all we need at this moment. So I'm going to create here our animation controller, and now we can't instantiate it directly here because it needs to reference to our mix in here. So if I tried to do it here, animation controller, and do it requires a vsync, this it's trying to reference its own class, and we can't do this before it's instantiated. So instead of that, we're going to do it in our init state. Animation controller equals this, so this is fine, but then we want to add a few more properties here to our animation controller, and it is the duration. So we want to define how long our animation is going to last, and we can do a bunch of things, but I'm going to do it in milliseconds. And I'm going to say it's going to last 150 milliseconds. Now, since we're doing an animation controller, we need to dispose of it. And to do that, we need to override the normal dispose method of a stateful widget and add here our animation controller.dispose. This make sure we don't run into any memory issues. And now, obviously, every time you load this page, you want this title and the other animation to run. So for that to happen, we actually need to say that our animation controller will move forward once our init state runs, as soon as the state gets this widget, the stateful widget gets instantiated. So now we have our animation controller. We want to pass it down to our text and image and our bottom widgets. They're stateless widgets. To run transitions inside them and animations, they don't need to be stateful themselves. Only where the animation controller is does it need to be stateful. So all we're going to have to do is come here and declare an animation controller, a local one, but that will be received from the outside. So let's do exactly that. Let's do our instantiation here. So our constructor, and I'm gonna mark it as, I'm going to mark this as required because I want to make sure that it's called and it notifies us if it's not present. Animation controller, there we go. That means now we get a notification here saying that we're missing a parameter that we've defined, and so I'm going to pass our animation controller from up there down here. Now it's missing. I'm missing a final because this is a stateless widget, so it should be final. All right, so let's try something. I'm going to add in our texts. This is all I want to animate. I don't want to animate the image right now. So I'm going to just wrap this around with a widget. I'm going to do a fade transition here. And to control the opacity, we need an animation. And for that, we just give it our animation controller that we're receiving from our parent widget. Now, this failed. That's fine because we haven't given it the state. We haven't refreshed our whole page or do a hot restart in this case. But before we do that, I'm going to change this to a full second just so we're able to see the animation. So let's go back here and let's click to see the kitty, and we still managed to catch that fade in after the animation happened. So you'll notice something is that we only catch, even though we put a second, we only catch the end of the animation, and this is because the transition from this first page into our second page has a duration itself, and I believe it's around 200 milliseconds. So what I'm going to do is add in a timer here, which I'll need to import the Dart async library. And now we have a timer. I'm going to say that I want it to last 200 milliseconds, and only then do I want to move our animation forward. So I'm going to do exactly that. Pass on this method here. Let's save this. And now I'm going to tap to see the kitty. And now our fade only happens once we go into the page and the first transition happens, and this way only then do we get the fade. Now I can actually move it to be a little bit faster. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it's much nicer now. Now, I don't want to do just, as we mentioned before, just a fade animation. I actually want to add a fade transition, another transition, which is a slide transition. So this slide transition is a bit different because it requires not just to be passed on an animation controller, an animation in this case. We have position, but this actually, if I try to just put here our animation controller, it won't work. We'll see that it gives us an error. It needs an offset. So for that, we need to give it a tween. And the tween, in this case, I'm going to straight away define it as an offset tween. And now we see that this tween has a beginning and an end. For those of you who don't know, you may look into the documentation, but the tween is an interpolation between a beginning and an end. So it's like a range of numbers, let's say, for example. In this case, it is a range of offsets. It starts at one value and it ends at the other, and it goes all the ones in between. So our animation controller will be syncing with the frames per second, and as that goes, it's going to advance in the range that we've given it. And so I'm going to say that our first offset is going to be an R offset takes an X and Y number values, in this case, not exactly coordinates. And what I'm going to say is I want it to start at -1. So I want it to start outside on the left side. -1 is the left side of our viewing page. And I want it to have a 0 for the y-axis. So x is -1 and y is 0, so it stays exactly in the same area as it is vertically. And now ends is going to be where we want it to finish. I want it to finish where it started, so I could do 0, 0, but we actually have a different method here to just display 0. Now this is all still showing us an error, as we can see here, because it still needs to be an animation. But there is a method for that on our tween, which is animate, and this is where we're going to give it our animation controller. Now let's see what happens. So we click here, and there we go. We get both the fade and the movement from outside into the view. Now I want to replicate this to our bottom side here on our emulator, and to do that I'm going to do some copy paste. I'm going to take this that we have here. First of all, actually, before we do that, we're going to copy all of this part that we actually need for our animation controller, because we're going to need the same thing for our bottom widget here. Just need to change the name here. And now for slide transition, I'm going to copy the same, and I'm going to replicate what we've done before. So in our top widget here, I'm going to put in a fade transition, opacity, give it the animation controller, and then I'm going to do this again with the helper here, slide transition, position. I don't need to write it because we've pasted in. Same thing. Difference is now I don't want to move it on the x-axis. I want to have it on the y-axis, and I'm going to put 1 instead of -1 because I don't want it to come from above. I want it to come from below our viewing port here. So let's do exactly that. Saved. Let's click back. This obviously had an error because this is stateful and it didn't expect to have that information yet. So once we click here, oops, I know what the error is, and this is obviously because I haven't passed our animation controller here. So if I do exactly as we have above and now save, we no longer have an error. Let's go back. We click here, and there we go. We've got our animation. We've got a fade and a slides in both of our animations. Let's see, it's going fine. Maybe we could adjust the milliseconds a little bit, but I think each person can do that to your own preference. So that's about it. That's it for today. We do very simple animations, fade and slide. We got a nice kitty, and we get to see our animations go through as soon as our first transition finishes. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you another day.